So let's talk 3 Kickstarters that need to be on your radar if you're like me in the next month, month and a half. Now, I say month, month and a half because 2 of these 3 games I know for sure are launching in January from what the companies have said. The third one, all of a sudden, was maybe February. Maybe it's going to get moved up a little bit, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But all 3 of these have, I think, very high potential. I think 2 of the 3 are flying under the radar right now. 3 that are relatively coming from different backgrounds up until these Kickstarter launch dates. And I think all 3 are worth talking about. So let's talk about them. The first up is Primal the Awakening. If you're not aware of Primal the Awakening by now, you will be by the end of the month. Primal the Awakening is another one of those campaign boss battler story element kingdom death-esque games. The hype on it is real at this point. There's been several big unboxings by Quackalope, by I think Rolling Solo. I believe One Stop Co-op Shop is having a video launch on the day of the campaign. I wouldn't be surprised if a few other people, Dice Tower, I think I was chatting with Stella from Dice Tower because she posted a few pictures of them playing it on Twitter earlier in the week, and it looks fantastic. What separates this from a lot of the other games that sort of fit that genre or niche already in our community? And a lot of these games have adapted and used Kingdom Death Monster as a basis for where they're coming from initially. Say what you want about Kingdom Death Monster. I think parts of it are grotesque and parts of it are just not appropriate, but the iterations and the creativity and the ingenuity that the gameplay mechanics have spawned a whole genre, a whole compilation of games from it. We're talking the Kingdom Death Monster tree, if you will. Sort of like they do in sports, when you've got big name coaches like Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots, Nick Saban of Alabama college football, where these coaches that work with them as assistants, as role players, then go out, sprout like branches from the tree, or roots, to develop their own programs, to develop their own way of doing things elsewhere, and oftentimes will have varying degrees of their own success on top of that. And that is what I feel like Primal the Awakening is. Now, the tricky thing is, you can't just take one mechanic and be able to be successful, as in coaching. You have to be able to be adaptable to what you are given, and I think you have to have your own level of ingenuity that is not just part of a system. So the question is, will Primal Awakening do that? The information we have had so far is very tight-lipped. At some point when the campaign launches, it's going to go from a trickle to a full-blown trying to keep your mouth over a fire hydrant. And so we'll see what ends up happening, because then things are going to be really scrutinized and, put under a microscope to see, okay, where is the value? How much content am I getting? What is the price point? None of these things are known. If you take the Kingdom Death Monster comparison, Kingdom Death Monster, say what you will about the price, you can say plenty of things about it, but KDM has spawned all of these other games underneath its shadow that are all sort of reflective of that being the initial precursor. You can take that core game and you can play that game, unless you are like a soloist or a solely dedicated gamer to just that game. You can play that game ad nauseum and not get through half the stuff, not get sick of any of it. And that's a concern I have with a game like Primal the Awakening. Are there going to be enough depth and layers of content within just the base game? Again, say what you want about Awakened Realms, but you can guarantee that that core value of that pledge is going to be worth it. So how is Reggie Games going to make it worth it for us? How many bosses are going to be in just the core? What's going to happen between these fights? How upgradable, how asymmetric, how customizable is it going to be? We don't really know. So all of that is going to come to fruition. The other thing that KDM has going for it is, if you think about a second for the expansions, if you've ever played it, the expansions all add their own unique layer, twist, depth, mechanisms, equipment. They all have so much in them in such a small, relatively speaking, package. And they will often add it in different ways. That's why I think it's important. Now, Primal the Awakening is different, and I think that's the important thing, is that all of these games at the same time seem to have a different spin on the KDM element of things. They have their own flavor. Now, what's Primal the Awakening's flavor? We've seen some fantastic looking art. We're starting to see with the unboxing some fantastic looking miniatures. And now we are going to be seeing later this month what else they have in store for us. I think it's fair to say, of the Kickstarters that we know already that are coming in this year, the fact that one of the most hyped is coming in January is relatively exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this has to offer, because if it looks entertaining, I am going to be an all-in day one backer. The biggest question is value. Now, again, going back to what does it bring to the table? It's bringing more of a Monster Hunter vibe. This is the game that people have been saying since we have slowly been getting that trickle of information that I mentioned, that this has the reminiscence or the vibe of Monster Hunter World, the video game. And prior to the January announcement, there was a big question about what was going to come out first. The actual IP-related licensed Monster Hunter World, the board game from Steamforged Games, or this. As a side note, I think this personally puts a lot of pressure on Monster Hunter the board game, because they have sort of a direct competitor now. And how do you make yours mechanically different, also while staying true to the IP? Is that going to be the approach that we see with Primal the Awakening 2? Or is it going to be more like Townsfolk Tussle Kickstarter campaign, which you can argue that many campaigns should be doing more of? They stayed in their lane and they said, this is what we've got for you. These are the possibilities of being stretched and achieving. And beyond that, guys, we're not going to make up an expansion on the spot. We're not going to try to come up with extra miniatures or extra bosses or anything like that that's going to affect our ability to produce it when we want to produce it for you, but our ability to produce it how we want to produce it for you. And so there is definitely something that needs to be said about that approach as well. Price point, I see this price point being mid 200s as an all-in. Maybe higher, depending on what the core actually is. Timetable, again, I always hope that these things come to Kickstarter or crowdfunding in general with more done. I'm hoping that's why they delayed it from the end of 2020, the last Q4 of 2020 into Q1 of 2021, so that they'd have more, but I don't know. And so I could easily see this delivery date, not what they're projecting, I could easily see this delivery date being late 2022. Do I care? No, it's just more of a guess. What do we know about the mechanics so far? Very little that we do know, based on some of the diagrams and some of the unboxings and some of the videos that are out there, is that this combat is going to take your traditional square, box type board, your grid style marching through the dungeon, and it's going to toss it out the window, for better and for worse. Now, they've taken a circle, like a rondel type approach, where you've got it divided into sections, and the boss is in the center, and your characters are surrounding the boss. And at first glance, I'm sure if this is the first time hearing of that, it doesn't sound very exciting. It doesn't sound like there's going to be enough strategy or enough options. And believe me, I was in that headspace as well. But over on the Board Game Geek forums, one of the users there made an absolutely insightful post about, actually, with just very small elements thrown into those four sections, terrain, and the ability to use the terrain or hide behind the terrain or come out from it, or to switch areas depending on which way the boss is facing, and depending, again, where the KDM element comes in. Is there a blind spot? Is there a weak point? Is there a different way to attack it that is going to give you an advantage? All of a sudden, your multitude of options goes from like, well, do I stay in this area or move to the next area? All of a sudden becomes from like 2 things to like 6 or 8. And then all of a sudden, you've got 2 or 3 other people doing the same thing, it's a lot more intriguing. And I'd love to see some way of combining attacks. What if one guy over here has, a poison attack and it lines up with my fire attack, and because they both hit him, and it does something special. I haven't seen that mechanic in anywhere. I just made that up off the top of my head, but I think it's something intriguing that this style maybe allows you to do a little bit freer than a grid style approach. All in all, I have no qualms, again, about saying this is probably one of, if not the top 2 or 3 most hyped, personally, Kickstarter games to come to crowdfunding this year. So we'll see. We'll see all this by the end of the month. I'm going to be covering it. And if you're interested, check it out. My eyes are going to be on it. There's going to be a lot of eyes on it. The hype is real. And I've only heard good things from the people who have stuff so far. So we'll see how that translates into actually a funding amount. Because things like shipping and cost in general will affect that. And so pricing becomes very important too. There you go. The second Kickstarter that I think you need to be aware of that is coming to Kickstarter next week, just over week and a half away, is one that has completely flown under the radar. I didn't know about it, but it actually annoyingly appeared on a Facebook ad. I know, right? I've never had one that I wanted to click on, but I clicked on this. As you know, or as you may have intimated or guessed, I am a fan of anime. I had never heard of this style, but it was styled in the anime sense, and that is Epic 7 Arise. Now, this is based off of a video game where this demon comes in, destroys the world, good guy comes in, restores the world, and you're fighting to, as heroes to help, the good guys win, essentially. I'm not sure much more of the story than that. I know it's more complex. There's a whole video game app based on it. When I dove into it a little bit deeper, it's sort of, like I said, flying under the radar. Man vs. Meeple did a video, I believe earlier in the month of December. All of a sudden, the 4K unboxing from one of the content creators over in Europe just got uploaded to Board Game Geek. And then the 5-Minute Rules girl did a video about a week ago. All of a sudden, this is just rolling. And they announced, I believe, that their Kickstarter is launching on January 12th. Sorry for bearing the lead there. Why should you be excited about it? What should you know about it? Well, again, it's another spin on the dungeon crawl. And again, they've done a little bit different take on it. They're using a combination of miniatures and standees. So already, if you're not a big fan of a ton of plastic, but you want miniatures, take a look. Be aware, though, that they've stayed with the style of the game in that it is more anime-esque. That may turn off people in a little bit of a way. So I thought it'd be easier to show rather than just to tell. So this is what it is. And again, I wasn't making this up. So it's on my wish list. There are 0 ratings, 0 comments so far. And if you go down further, there are only 33 people with it on their wish list. So this is flying under the radar completely. Even the forums have 3 things. One, again, is that unboxing I mentioned. And then a month ago, 2 months ago, and just the video. So I truly wasn't joking that it's really flying under the radar. And I found it by pure chance. Now, what makes me excited about this and what makes this stand out from other ones that, like I just mentioned, Primal the Awakening, or the other things that you see that are relatively normalized in the dungeon crawl genre? Well, one, it takes the element of AI in a little bit slightly different direction. You are going to have objectives that you are trying to meet between tiles. And the AI is going to attack based on within the tile. Again, they've taken the grid and modified it. And so there's 4 sections within each of the tiles. They're each numbered. And depending on what you roll, depends on which ability the bad guys use, which then affects a certain area in the tile. So if you're just in a different area, you're going to avoid the attack. Or some of them will hit all of the areas, or a larger majority, especially as you get towards the boss battles. You have the ability to team attack. You have the ability to link up in team attack because they have something akin to sort of a friendship or relationship meter between the characters that you can use resources, crystals that you gain to do these better attacks. It looks to be more episodic in nature, which is a great thing because you're trying to capture sort of more of the Cthulhu Death May Die, where that game has really taken the variability and the mixability between the good guys and the bad guys and the setup and the scenarios and really done a great job at giving you a different experience every time. And that's sort of the element that I see in this game. And that's why I really am going to follow this campaign when it launches, and why I think it's a little bit underrated, because it sort of gives me that vibe with the videos, the small amount of videos that are out there already. It sort of reminds me of Cthulhu Death May Die, again, in the sense that initially it was written off, or could have been written off, as not the deepest dungeon crawler, or not the most strategic, or not the most tactical. But I look at it as it's easy to get to the table, everyone has fun playing it, and the combination of the bad guys where you can take this scenario with this big boss, with these little bosses, or these mini bosses, or these, minions, and scramble them all together and get a completely different game than you did previously. Quick setup, quick teardown. That's what I see in this game. That's what it gives me the vibes of when I watch some of the videos that are out there already. As a company that is not crowdfund savvy, in the sense that they have not put out other board games, I really am going to scrutinize what the price point is for something like this. Because, like I mentioned, they're using a combination of standees and miniatures. Is that going to save me money, or is it going to be priced more along the lines of some of the other gaming companies if they had used full miniatures, but because being new there, it's probably going to cost you more? I don't know. That would be my biggest concern. And again, just like with Primal the Awakening, what is the core going to contain? And then what else are we going to see? The Man vs. Meeple video does a great job of explaining a little bit of how the turn sequence goes. They also mention that you're getting 8 characters in the core box. So that's a relatively good variety. How many bosses am I getting, though? How many minions am I getting? How much are the expansions going to be, and how much are going to be in each expansion? Because you know it's going to come. The question just is, again, how much? Another thing that I really like what they're doing here is initially it starts out very linear, but apparently as you get further into storios or scenarios, the map becomes more complex. And they've taken that video game aspect, sort of your Final Fantasy-esque, where each time you go onto a new map, you're fighting a new guy, and it's using the turn-based style system. Hence, the Final Fantasy comparison. Sort of those random battles each time you go to a new zone, right? 2 other elements that I saw during this Man vs. Meeple video that already made me a little excited, showing that they've done their due diligence in some of the thought and the intuitiveness of this game, is that there is an initiative tracker. And it goes along the bottom of the storyboard and the bad guys. And the bad guys have their own little card, and it lines up with the storyboard, and you can see right on their card where they line up from like 1 to 9. And then you've got your little meeples, and there's an indentation on the bottom of the card for the meeples, so you can just slot them in where they go. So you have an easy visual representation of the initiative order every single time you do a fight. I also like the fact that, and some people may not like this, it is not a game where you have kill stealing, because for better and for worse, you have sort of rankings of who does the most damage to enemies. So the first person is going to get rewards, but also if you just helped, you're still going to get a reward, even though it may not be as good. So the blessing and the curse that it is. And sometimes you won't like all of it, but even if you assist and you're not the most, you're still going to get some benefit to your character for doing that. And I like to see that in a co-op game. I think it keeps people more engaged. And I haven't really seen that in too many other co-op games, especially of the dungeon crawl nature. Some people are going to look at the gameplay, I think, initially, because you only have 2 cards in your hand potentially at some points, that it's going to make it relatively simplistic. But each time you're playing card, you're gathering things called souls, which are going to allow you to amplify future attacks or future abilities, or do those little friendship attacks that I mentioned earlier. So there's layered elements without making the actual individual elements complicated or analysis paralysis type decisions. They also talk about, obviously, there's other elements. You're getting new artifacts, you're getting new skill cards, you're getting all sorts of other stuff. So again, the depth I think is going to be there, and I don't think this simplicity should fool you or pull the wool over your eyes potentially. But again, I want to see an actual gameplay. The Man vs. Meeple did a great job of just doing a general overview of the rules and sort of the how to play, but I want to see an actual gameplay. So I would be hoping that they're going to have 1 or 2 of those up there. But again, like I said, I haven't seen it on anybody's radar on social media or on Board Game Geek or anywhere else. So I'm not sure what else is going to be out there. Hopefully there will be, because I think that would be the big make it or break it, because it is sort of a new company doing a new thing with. Okay, that's number 2. Epic 7, Arise. Now, number 3, again, it flew under my radar. If you watched my hyped Kickstarter video for the ones I was excited about for 2021, this was on there. And this is Agemonia. Now, why am I highlighting Agemonia? Well, because I don't know exactly when it's going to launch. There was just an update on Board Game Geek saying that the gaming company that is publishing, designing it out of Europe, I believe it's Finland, is going to be having an announcement soon about the exact timing. But initially on the Board Game Geek forums, they mentioned February, and now they talked about moving it up sooner. So I think you could see it again towards the end of January potentially. So that's why I'm going to address it now. I think it's worth that. Agemonia seems to be very heavily based on role-playing games. And the designer has actually started putting designer diaries on the Board Game Geek forums. The designer is Max Wilkstrom, and he even goes in on there talking about his background being very heavily RPG based. And that, long story short, he had his regular group had to take a break from doing their RPG, which they weren't initially happy about, to playtest and help him with this game, which now they are apparently very happy that they did so. Why am I excited about this, and what makes this stand out? In those designer diaries, he talks about having this game and developing this game over years. Years and years and years. So this is not a game that someone has taken over the last 6 months and said, you know what, I'm going to, brush up on a few new things. I'm going to put my twist on D&D, and here you go, I'm going to put it in a board game world. This is a fully fleshed out world with a deep storyline campaign, as it's self-described. All of a sudden, in this magical world, bad stuff, cataclysmic stuff is happening. Electrical storms, tsunamis, volcanoes, all of that typical stuff. Why is this happening? That's what you're trying to figure out. He also makes it very clear that this is not going to be necessarily an easy game. There's also going to be moral choices, like there often are in the aspect of a lot of the tabletop role-playing games in the first place. Everything is not black and white. Good guy, bad guy. No, it doesn't work like that. On the other video that I commented on this, I got a great comment from Jeremy from Man vs. Meeple, and he was saying the mechanic to watch out for on this one, and again, that's what's going to set it apart from a lot of the other games that are generic in this realm and this niche, is what you need to be looking for. The thing that's going to set this apart is how the story overlays on the map. They've got this scenario map, and story points are triggered, and it's going to change what you've got going on in front of you. A few other quick nuances. You have mana, you spend mana. You take damage, you have less mana to spend, because that's also being used to track your health. Now, what would a dungeon crawl or a campaign crawl be without dice rolling and ability checks? And they talk about 3 main types of ability checks that you're going to be doing and rolling dice and having ways to mitigate it, a la, sort of your D&D element being thrown back in there to see what happens with the story or in just a situation. I've looked over the first two scenarios that they have presented on Tabletop Simulator. Now, I don't have Tabletop Simulator currently, but they give a full breakdown of the scenario. They talk about what you're doing, and they even tell you in the first scenario what to do. And it's really interesting because it takes, for example, and I believe it's on the Board Game Geek forums if you're interested, it takes you into an inn without doing too many spoilers, and all of a sudden this inn is flooding. And there's other people, and there's multiple ways that you can be interacting and things that you can be doing during your turn. And you have a couple different actions that you can choose to do, and how you choose to use those interactions is going to affect the turn order, but also potentially the enemy's turn order later on, because it's color coded. And so depending on which action you use, if you use the move action, it might be colored red for one character and blue for another character. Well, in the initiative order, blue might be first and then red, but in between you have an enemy action. So you might want to move, but if you want to go before the enemy, you might have to take a different action. So it takes the initiative as well and spins it in a creative and unique way that I haven't really seen done before. Those story points that I mentioned as well, you're not wasting actions. It's like you go over there and it happens or it's revealed. So you're not having to worry about, okay, well, I have to spend an extra action point to, have this revealed or to flip over. No, I mean, you go over there and you see what it is. As I mentioned with those story points, who you help, how you help them has an influence on the next chapters in the later games. You might get a reward. A certain person is around or not around. So again, it's nice to see a game that seems to be encapsulating those elements from the get-go and doing it in a relatively intuitive yet also simplistic way. Complex does not always mean better, and that's why I like seeing what I'm seeing so far from this game. The biggest question I have is, these are just glimpses, and so what layers lay beyond obviously an opening tutorial scenario? And there's not a whole lot of information, but hopefully as Max releases more designer diaries, we get a little bit more insight into some of those nuances that already in the first two scenarios are drastically different than some of the other stuff I've seen out there in your typical dungeon crawl or story campaign type games. And it's done enough to capture my interest just with that little bit. So the fact that the art is top notch and this is a world that he has already developed is amazing. And it's gonna get me as a first day one, check this out, see where things are at. And just like with the other two on this list, I have to hope that things are priced well. And I hope that you're getting all the stuff that checks all the boxes, because as much as I hate to say this, and as much as my bank account is not going to like me, I would happily, with the stuff that I know about these three, if all of these meet my expectations, I could see myself very easily backing all three of these things, which makes it nice that I didn't back anything in December. So it sort of evens out. So we'll see. So those are the three games that I am most excited about coming in the next month. I'm sure there will be others. I'm sure I'm going to talk about others. But those are the three that, of all the ones that I know, I think should be on your radar if you're anything like me in terms of your tastes. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts, questions, concerns. Have a great beginning of 2021. Stay classy out there. See you around.